Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at the Tech Lab here on the INCYBER Forum 2025. I am here with Amir Shamir on stage, and we're going to talk, or Amir will talk to you about how hackers can hijack your brain waves and control your thoughts during a demo. We're going to have a 30-minute talk, and then after we're going to have a questions and answer session. Enjoy, and see you soon.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening. It is a very good crowd today, better than yesterday when I spoke about healthcare security. So today we have quite an interesting topic to talk about, and at the end of the slides there is a bonus. I'm going to invite someone else to talk about the ethical and legal dilemmas as well. The session today is hacking your brain, how hackers can hijack brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, and potentially control your thoughts. Does that intrigue anyone here? Don't give me a cold room, please. I'm not going to function well. Okay, who am I? If you don't already know me, Lille is like my second home now. I come here every year with intriguing and good topics to talk about. I have a couple of startups that I run that are unrelated to cybersecurity. Plus, I'm also managing Decentralweb, which is a Web3 platform. Once upon a time, a couple of years ago, I was ranked the number 3rd ethical hacker. And I've written a couple of books, and I've done my PhD in applied blockchain security. So I'm going to do my best to try and cover as much of this as possible, because 30 minutes is not the amount of time I was hoping for. But I will do my best to try and cover as much as I can. And here's a note to myself that I wrote. You should never carry a brain-computer interface when you're traveling, because it gets confiscated. I was about to bring it here to show you a live demo, but we're going to have to work with videos for now. Okay. So this is today's news. Neuralink is claiming to restore a blind person's sight. And this is what I just learned today. They were thinking of curing paralysis. They were adamant on curing different kinds of diseases. So we are past the time you could control your wheelchair using a brain-computer interface. Don't worry, guys. This is the only video with audio. The speakers do need a repair here, by the way. So, now why I chose to talk about this. Now, I am the biggest Iron Man fan that you can find, including the fact that I own collectible coins of Iron Man. The first time I basically came to know about a BCI was in the Iron Man movie itself, where he had a little, contraption connected to his head, and he was controlling machines and ordering AI to do this sort of stuff. But this goes way back. Like, in the 90s, there was a movie called John Mnemonic, where, Keanu Reeves actually used to use his own brain as a storage device. And fast forward to today, we've seen that in Blade Runner and, all of these different kinds of movies. By the way, food for thought, every session and every talk and every research of mine is inspired by a movie. For instance, I talk a lot about maritime cybersecurity. Does anyone remember the movie Speed 1 here? Where the hacker controlled the yacht and everything. So that's why I got into maritime cybersecurity. I got into BCIs because of these two movies that inspired me to know more about how BCIs work. In today's world, we have been talking about network security, web application security, mobile application security, IoT security, and all these kinds of security mechanisms. But look back about a decade from now, there was absolutely no way that anyone could think that SCADA security is relevant. You just connect a computer system to the PLCs, or you connect a computer system to an IoT machine, and it just worked. Today, believe it or not, 23% of cybersecurity spending today is in SCADA and industrial control system security itself. That is a fact, and that's just 10 years down the line. We just learned today that Neuralink is working on BCIs that are going to cure people's eyesights. So we need to understand why BCIs and their security is important. Because we should think about our own brains. EKGs, MMGs, ECGs, these are the signals emitted by our bodies. These are mechanisms that us humans have developed to understand the human body well. The most important kind of signals, or the most important kind of processes that we have developed, is electroencephalographs or electroencephalograms. These are basically methods to record electrical signals emitted by our brains. Now, initially, they were developed to understand the behavior of mice, how their brain reacts to certain chemicals and how their brains react to different stimulations. Now, the foundations of brain-computer interfaces is basically dependent on EEGs themselves. And we're going to talk about a little bit of this. But first, I'm going to tell you, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a biologist. My father is a doctor, but I don't have any experience in medical science. So in order to understand how BCIs work, I had to, deep dive myself into understanding how the brain works. The brain has different kinds of lobes. There are things inside our brain that still we cannot comprehend. There's the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the spinal cord, the temporal lobe, the cerebrum. Our brain is the most complex organ inside our body. Now we're living in an age where we are trying to control or understand the brain, or trying to control a machine using a brain, and vice versa. So this is the shortest and easiest possible definition of neuroscience that I can give you. Our brain emits different kinds of waves. There's gamma waves, betas, alpha, theta, delta. All of these waves, work on mechanisms and give us feedback of how our brain, actually works. What's going on in there? For example, the gamma waves are active when you're stressed. The alpha waves are active when you're calm. When you are in a state of rest or sleeping, the alpha waves are more dominant. And all of these waves, everything that I've talked about, they come from these little things inside our brains called neurons. Neurons are basically electrons, as they are to atoms. Neurons are to our brains. And the process to basically transfer the electrical signals from one cell to another is called synapse. In short, the human brain is very complex, and we're diving into uncharted territory when we are trying to control a machine using a brain, or when we're trying to stimulate our brain using electrical signals. So that day or that time is not far from us, where, trust me, this is scarier than AI. Like, AI is a program that we can control. This is not okay. If a specific kind of electrical signal was to be emitted using electronic flux in the air right now, we could all go totally crazy. And once again, I like to use movie references. Kingsman: The Golden Circle was a movie. In that movie, there was one scene where everyone's brain just exploded because there was a certain electrical signal that was emitted using the air. They were related to sound waves, but it is very clear. Okay. Look at the video in front of you right now. That's actually a person controlling a cursor using their brain. This was about 5 years ago. We are way farther now. Brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, are basically very simple bidirectional devices that can be used to control electronic devices, or they can be used to influence the human brain. The simplest possible example that we created as our final year project in school was controlling a wheelchair. A person who was amputated completely had to control a wheelchair using their brain. Obviously, we didn't have a real amputated subject, so my friend sat on it and he kept crashing into a pole because we could not filter the electrical signals very well. I'm sorry, guys, I don't know French, so I'm going to do my best to speak in English as much as possible. Now, how these BCIs work. Now, this is very important for us to learn and understand. Brain waves are electrical signals. They're analog signals that get converted into digital signals, and then these digital signals are used to control devices, or if digital signals are converted into analog signals, they're used to stimulate the brain. Now, the word digital is very, very important, and the word digital is something that should scare the hell out of us right now, because we live in a digital world, and we have digital things all around us. And when we are trying to make our brain digital, the problem is that we are forgetting the security aspects of it, and I'm going to show you in a bit of how this happens. A typical brain-computer interface just consists of acquisition devices. They capture the brain's neural signals, and then they transform those signals into digital signals by signal processing. There are filters involved, there are amplifiers involved, because this is the process of how these things actually work. There is a pre-processing stage. There's a feature extraction stage, because it is very complex. Like, if I tell you right now what you are thinking, you cannot tell me that in the split of a second, because we are thinking multiple things right now. Like right now, you're thinking about a duck, because I mentioned duck. The next thing, you're thinking about Optimus Prime, because he's a robot. That's because I said it. Before, you were thinking about Iron Man. Now you're visualizing Iron Man in your brain. So the brain emits all kinds of electrical signals. That is why it is important to extract those features, classify them, and then output the signal into them. Similarly, the signal acquisition of a BCI is the acquisition of analog signals and converting them into digital signals, and then giving feedback to the user. There are 3 kinds of BCIs. The number one is non-invasive, like for which you don't need any kind of surgery, or there's no surgical procedure involved. The second one is semi-invasive, where you just have to cut a little bit of your head open without entering the skull or the brain itself. And the third one is completely invasive, which is what Neuralink is doing right now. This is an example of non-invasive BCI. I'm sorry for the typo there. This is an example of what a non-invasive BCI actually looks like. It's just like a helmet or a contraption. The second one is semi-invasive, where you just cut a little bit of a skin open and plant the electrodes over a person's head. It goes in descending order in terms of effectiveness. The third one is obviously the invasive BCI, where you have to cut open the whole thing. Okay, the electroencephalogram. It was basically just developed as a testing mechanism to measure electrical signals inside the brain, or to measure brain activity. That's what it was developed for. So basically, a couple of electrodes were planted on mice, and their electrical signals were basically measured. These signals are very, very small in nature. They're usually in microvolts, and the frequency is 1 to 30 hertz. So you can imagine this, that if you're measuring a specific kind of electrical signal from someone's brain, it is like listening to a conversation in a football stadium from a blimp. Do we still have blimps in the air? Okay. Now, these are the case studies of what BCIs are used for. Brain-to-brain interfaces. Someone sitting here in Feek and the other person sitting in Singapore. The person sitting here in France can control the person sitting in Singapore's hand using transcranial magnetic simulation techniques across the internet. Because we're influencing electrical signals, and electrical signals can transfer over the wire. Transfer learning in emergency responses. If both of the pilots are unconscious in a plane and the stewardess or the hostess is required to control the plane, someone from the control tower can help her if she, puts on a little bit of helmet in there. Drone control. This was actually done by NATO very recently, of how an operator was able to control a drone, using brainwaves. And then, this is my favorite one, past thoughts. We are beyond passwords now. We live in the world of past thoughts, using your thoughts as a format of authentication. Then, soldiers converting brainwaves into commands, creation of art. There was a very good, refined case study where a murder was resolved using EEGs. Then we have neurogaming. And another very good example was where a person was, a company is basically working on a solution or mechanism for creating Tinder using BCIs. So you are a male and the other person is a female, and they measure your EEGs, and then they find out if you're compatible or not. Now, what are the security flaws? And this is very interesting. If you can capture brainwaves and if you can digitize them, you can do replay attacks. You can, do replay attacks when controlling drones or prosthetics. Imagine a person just hitting themselves again and again because someone hacked their prosthetic limb. That is a reality. Controlling equipment, just as I said, wheelchairs and that sort of stuff. Then there's something called data trade for neuromarketing. Living in an age right now, I know this may sound far-fetched and dystopian to you guys, but trust me, this is a reality of today's age. I always like to talk about things that are controversial, and this is the most controversial thing in the world right now. Neuromarketing. Marketing based on your EEG patterns and brainwaves. So the security flaws in BCIs can be classified into 3 types. We have design flaws, we have the encryption and authentication flaws, and you're gonna love the next thing, by the way, and then we have reliability, denial of service. The best example for that can be you are, for example, a disabled person sitting on a wheelchair, and you cannot go to the bathroom because the hacker wants you to pay 1 Bitcoin because they're not going to allow you to move your wheelchair. The next generation of ransomware is neuro-ransomware. Design. The thing is, and the problem is that only a few EEG headset vendors actually mention security. There is, if you look at, NeuroServer or Brain Spy, these are EEG headset vendors. You won't even find words like authentication, encryption, or SSL, or security. They're non-existent in the documentation. I can say that because I have read 200 pages worth of brochures, and I did not find anything related to security in BCIs. Then we have encryption or authentication. I looked at a couple of vendors during my research. BCI vendors are basically using basic TCP/IP standard protocols. We have something called Brain Vision Record Viewer. It does communication in clear text. Neuroelectric NICs does communication on port 1235, which is unauthenticated. The NeuroServer TCP/IP basically transforms the EDF is basically a format for parsing the brainwave data into a computer system itself. So it is vulnerable to something called a man-in-the-middle attack. And this, sorry for the quality of the image, by the way, if something is unencrypted, it can be hacked. And if there's no authentication, it can be hacked even easier. So you have an acquisition device transmitting data on 192.168.24.1, and the server is at .149. The attacker's in the middle. This is what happens. What happens is that, and this is Alejandro, he and I, back in 2018, we collaborated on this research together. He's a Mexican. He's a Mexican researcher. What happened was that when the entire aspect of this BCI encryption authentication was found out, we could actually intercept that communication and replay that in a different scenario. For instance, look at this video. In this particular demo, what we're doing is we're intercepting the clear text data that is coming in from the BCI interface, and we're changing the patient's name. Now, changing the patient's name is just a hello world of a scenario. We can change anything. We can change the entire electroencephalograph of that particular patient, and we can send false data to the EEG server, and because the EEG server's job is to respond to that data, the response of that data will also be flawed, which means the machine control will not be accurate or will not be refined enough to perform that particular kind of attack. So what you're seeing is a classic man-in-the-middle attack. We are using tools that were used like a decade ago, EtherCap and all that sort of stuff. And what you see here is us changing the patient's name such that the patient data is corrupted. So, here, look at me, guys. Need your attention here. This is an EEG device. This is an EEG server. This is the attacker. Brainwaves are continuously being transmitted to the EEG server. The attacker comes in, takes that data, manipulates it, and sends false data to the EEG server. For instance, the server was responsible for controlling a wheelchair, and it was supposed to go right. If you go straight, you're going to fall off a cliff. In this particular case, because we're able to intercept that data, the person is eventually going to fall off the cliff. And it's a long video, but I want you to see that we actually did manage to change the patient's name. Let me see. Oops. So we were able to successfully change the patient's name in this scenario. Next is reliability. Denial of service attacks. Completely denying the user of using their BCI contraption entirely. And trust me, in 90s, the attacks that were used in 1990 can still be used in these kinds of EEG devices. This is an EDF header that we can create to crash the NeuroServer itself. If you understand this, there are multiple channels in a BCI, and there are multiple channels in BCI interfaces. And what we can do is we can basically change that entirely and completely, and we can crash the EEG server or the NeuroServer. And this is what I'm going to do to show you. NeuroServer is basically a widely used brain-computer interface server out there. What happens is that by crafting a simple Python malformed header, you can very, very easily crash the NeuroServer, thus denying the user entirely of what are they going to do with their brain. Now what you're going to see here is the server has started. Now we are going to send malformed requests. And you're going to see that the server will stop accepting connections entirely. And BCI interfaces are vulnerable to denial of service attacks of as simple as just creating multiple connections. So if you create an infinite loop of connections, the BCI server is simply going to eventually just crash. This is basically, it's the neuroelectric NICs. That's also a BCI server. And what we've done here is we've created a very simple Python script to automate the number of connections being made to the BCI device. And as simple as that, it crashes the BCI server. If you can see here, you can see at this point, NIC shouldn't accept any connections on both ports. So if anyone knows Python and knows socket programming, you are in very good hands, because the next generation of BCIs is vulnerable to this kind of attack. And then similarly, another vendor called OpenVibe was also vulnerable to this kind of attack. You just create infinite loop of connections and infinite loops. And we're going to look at some real world examples of these attacks as well. If I'm allowed 5 more minutes, great. This is another version of the same demo. Now we've looked at these things. The attack surface, what can we do with these kinds of things? What can we do with these kinds of attacks? Now that's very, very important to understand, and I'm going to explain that to you in a little bit, is that companies who use BCI technology to collect private information, they are basically collecting information about your inherent self-being. A very similar and good example of this is what happened to 23andMe. Do you guys know what 23andMe is? No one? 23andMe is a company that collected DNA samples. And for hundreds of millions of citizens worldwide, they collected DNA samples. And the company was hacked, and then it shut down. What they did was they sent you a nasal swab, and you were to basically send the sample back to them, and they would tell you what your genealogy is, where you're from, what is your heritage, who you actually are. So for those who have used their service, may God help you, because we don't know where your data is right now. There are, according to my research, 5 attack vectors when it comes to BCI interfaces. We have brainwave interception, which we just learned that hackers can eavesdrop on your brain activity. They can do man-in-the-middle attacks. BCIs basically transmit raw brain data. Hackers can decode brain activity and extract sensitive passwords and pins. EEG signal sniffing is one attack, side channel attacks, and wireless interception. Believe it or not, there is no dedicated protocol for brain-computer interfaces out there to be used right now. BCIs work on Bluetooth, Zigbee, and Wi-Fi, just like all those other devices. Next, we have neural hijacking, the remote control of your brain. If a hacker takes control of your motor functions, they could basically temporarily or permanently paralyze you from moving, because the motor functions are the functions that are responsible for these kinds of things. Attacker can use electrical and signal manipulation to trigger movements, like, I can just keep on slapping someone and they would think I'm rude, but my prosthetic limb would have been hacked. You're basically a puppet. This is because malicious BCI firmware updates are a thing right now. The signal injection is a thing right now, and remote control exploits are also a thing right now. And this is something called the amygdala hijack. This is a process where and when you are, it basically is the ability of your brain to firefight situations. Like right now, if a fire broke out into this arena, your first thought would be to run. And that's what everyone's first thought would be, right? What if an attacker can trigger that particular status in your brain? And what would they do with it? I leave it to your imagination. And then Dr. Bharani Raman, he is in the U.S. Naval Services Academy or University. He's also the associate professor at the Department of Engineering. He has been successfully able to replicate and hijack the sense of smell in insects. So he's able to make insects smell roses without the presence of roses. And this is the last point, and then I'm going to move towards the bonus that I was talking about, is that cognitive ransomware, and this is the scariest kind of BCI attack right now out there. Imagine losing complete control of your brain, and imagine losing complete control of your entire body, and having to pay an attacker a sum of money to basically regain control again. This is not science fiction. This is based on real hard facts and truths that are out there. We are thinking right now that, AI is going to take over the world. That may be a far-fetched reality, but this is what's happening in the world right now. People are working on it. Imagine someone like me has knowledge about it. Who else would have knowledge about it? Okay, now, guys, I would like to swiftly jump to the next part. As I said, we had to talk about the ethical dilemmas of brain-computer interfaces. I have with me Safina Ahmed. She is the master's in organizational psychology and behavior and a mental health advocate. So give us 3 to 4 minutes to talk about the non-technical aspects, please.
So you all must have heard the genius guy that has talked before me. I would just like to have 2 or 3 minutes of yours to discuss the critical, ethical, and moral dilemmas that are associated with brain hacking. So what we're talking about here right now is not some random Excel sheet, not your regular school report card or a file of your domicile at home. What we're talking here right now is about your very innermost thoughts, your sensitive mental health problems, your very critical behaviors that are deeply instilled in yourself, which are probably you yourself are not aware of. So the amount of dilemma involved here, the amount of borderline problems that are involved here are of utmost importance, right? Ultimately, the thing that we're talking about here is who owns your thought. It's not a random machine that is going to control you. Ultimately, what is of utmost important is that you are the main driver of your thoughts, and the misuse or unauthorized access of your thoughts or of your sensitive data that has been stored in your brain for no matter how long is at risk here. And what I believe is what brain control interface to you is what honey is to bees, right? So the amount of the tendency and the probability of malicious activities involved here and the risk involved here is beyond our imagination. So what is required here right now is the need of some robust legal protection. While I can be politically correct here and I can tell you that we're halfway there, or there are regulations that have the potential to determine the security of these systems, but the truth is that we're still dealing with the great amount of AI problems, and what we're dealing with here is far more critical and far more dangerous. So I leave it to you guys to ultimately decide that what is the right amount of regulation here and how we should move here with this critical interface that we're talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you both. You can both go on stage. Thank you very much for this quite fascinating and scary topic to discuss about. If you have some questions in the audience for Amir, do please proceed to it after our conference across the stage. And for now, we're going to receive here for a new conference Mr. Julien Slamovitz on a topic that is the supply chain attacks. Merci mesdames et messieurs pour votre présence nombreuse. Si vous voulez revoir Amir Shamir et discuter avec lui, eh bien, nous vous invitons à le retrouver à côté de notre espace. Et sur scène, maintenant, nous allons accueillir Julien Slamovitz-Zubak qui va nous parler des attaques de la supply chain à travers des distributions Linux. Merci à tous.